The same zoom you have for your project window, you also have for your key editor. So if you did zoom in or out and you want to show the whole part you're currently working on, you can do so by pressing Shift and E. That will expand that event you opened, that part you opened for your whole window. You see the parts begin and end here. And if I zoom and use Shift and E, then I have these two bars that I opened as big on my screen as possible. So of course, one thing that is correlated to zoom is your timeline, and by pressing the dot button on your keyboard, that will switch in the timeline between beats and bars and seconds. And correlated to the timeline is of course your grid. Right now I have it set to bars, and you can see I can only, for example, use my scissors tool every other bar. I can now, by pressing the button J, deactivate my grid completely, work here, and by pressing J again, activate the grid, and everything will be back to sticking to bars. That is very useful, and I use that a lot, but sometimes I'm not so happy with that solution because I have to change between grid on and off a lot. Then I use another function, and it's the command key. So if I have my grid activated and I press the command key, I have it deactivated for as long as I hold it down. So that is really helpful, so I can use it. I deactivate it and I let go, and it's activated again. So if you're in your project window and you want to use different functions of your mouse, you can do so by, for example, choosing tools over your numbers. So if you press the right mouse key, all your tools will be shown, and these are the same tools as here. They have numbers, and if you press the numbers, you can change the tools really quick. Some of them have more than one function. That is indicated by a tiny sign at the bottom of the tool you choose. So if you press here, you will see that there are 3 different versions available. If you do so here in your project window, so you have any tool and you go back to your normal object selection tool, you can press, for example, 1. And if you press 1 more than once, it will change between these three tools. Another option for your mouse in the project window is to use the Alt modifier. That means you hold down Alt, and if you're somewhere where there is no data, Alt will give you the option to draw in events. If you are over a part where there is already data, the Alt key will give you two different options. One is the scissors tool. If I hold my Alt key and go somewhere, and I can just cut my part. And the other is a duplication tool. So if I hold down Alt and drag this part somewhere else, it will be copied there. If you have your lanes function and you go there and hold down the Command key, you can see that your mouse changes to a little speaker symbol, and you can immediately start your playback wherever you hover your mouse. While I'm talking about playback, there is another good possibility to start a playback or listen to a certain part. And it goes like this. You use your range selection tool and make a selection of the part you want to listen to, and you press Alt and the L button. Alt and the L button will immediately start a playback of that part that I have selected, and it will be played once. If I select a part by clicking on it, or I use my range selection tool again and select any part, and I press Alt and P, that will immediately make a loop to that part and playback it. That works for the range selection tool, or if you click on it, Alt and P creates a loop and starts the playback. If you just want to playback a part from the beginning, I think it's really practical to just click on it and use the L button. That makes your cursor jump to the beginning of that part. That will give you two great working opportunities. At first, you can go there and start a playback, and you will hear that part exactly from the beginning. The other opportunity is you want to have, let's say, this is the start of my verse, and I want to have that synth line also moved to the start of the verse. So I set my cursor line by clicking somewhere and pressing L. And now if I select this part and want to have it moved there, I press Command and L. That makes every part jump to where my cursor line is. If I want to navigate here in my window, I can use the up and down keys and left and right, of course, and go to some parts, and of course use, for example, L to go there. Another possibility, which is really great, is the N and B button. N for next and B for back make you navigate on one track to the left and right, and you always will jump exactly to the beginning and end of your next event, forwards and backwards. If you select an event and hold down Command and use the right and left buttons, you can also move this part around. That also works for MIDI data. So if you select a MIDI event, you can move it up and down just by using your arrow keys, and Command and left and right will move that event in time, always regarding to your grid settings. If you have an event and you want to expand it, you can do so by using the kickers, which you will find here in your toolbar at the top, but there's also a shortcut for it. So you select an event, and by pressing down Alt and using the left-right buttons, you can expand it in the beginning, or if you use Shift and Alt, in the end. That also works for a selection. You can move this selection by using your arrow keys where you want to. And if you hold down Alt, you can expand it to the left, and Alt and Shift, you can expand it or decrease it on the right, or let's say on the end. Well, sometimes if you have something selected, you want to increase this selection. And you can do so by going to the end or beginning and using the arrows and drag it. But it is also possible to make a selection, go somewhere, press Shift and click. That will expand the selection to where your mouse is at, because otherwise a click will just deselect. So select something, hold down Shift. It also works with the Command button, and press on your left mouse button. That will expand the selection to where your mouse is at. Another possibility would be you have, for example, your cursor, you play a part, and here you wait for exactly the right moment and you hit stop. And then you think, well, now I want a selection starting in bar 21, and it should expand exactly to my cursor line, because that is the range I want to have. So it should stop at my cursor line. And sometimes you see my grid setting is not a good solution, so the part will be bigger or smaller than my cursor line. So to prevent that, there is a good possibility as a shortcut. You could also set your grid to your cursor line and then just drag your selection and it will snap to the cursor line. But if you don't want to do that, there is a neat shortcut you can use. You make a selection just anywhere. Let's say I want to go from bar 21 to my cursor line. I just press the button D and everything else in between gets selected and the selection stops exactly at my cursor line. That also works the other way. So if I want to have everything selected from bar 37 to my cursor line, I press the button E and the selection stops exactly at my cursor.